The sound of clinking ice cubes in an empty glass can be deafening in the charged silence of a first-class cabin. For Dr. Alani Adebayo, it was the opening salvo in a war she never intended to fight. She was a woman who could calculate the stress tolerance of a turbine engine in her head, a woman who held the safety of millions in her hands every single day. But on Stratusjet Flight 7112, from Chicago to Washington, D.C., all that mattered to the senior flight attendant was the one thing Alani couldn't change: the color of her skin. The simple request for a pre-departure glass of water would set off a chain reaction of arrogance, bigotry, and a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought they were putting a nobody in her place. They had no idea they were insulting the one woman who could dismantle their entire world before their plane even touched down. The hum of the Boeing 737 MAX was a familiar lullaby to Dr. Alani Adebayo. It was the sound of progress, of physics, conquered, of a world connected. As the Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety at the FAA, the sound was her life's work. Today, however, it was just background noise to a bone-deep weariness. She had spent 3 grueling days in Chicago, auditing the maintenance logs of a regional carrier, a tedious but vital task. Now all she wanted was to get back to D.C. for a critical Monday morning briefing at FAA headquarters. She found her seat 2B in the first-class cabin of Stratusjet Flight 712. She slid her slim leather briefcase under the seat in front of her and settled into the plush but surprisingly stiff seat. Stratusjet was a newer budget luxury airline that had aggressively expanded its routes, known for its sleek branding and cut-rate first-class fares designed to poach business travelers. Alani's ticket had been booked by her department. She never chose the airline, she just went where she was sent. The boarding process was a chaotic ballet of rolling suitcases and muffled apologies. A senior flight attendant with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda moved through the cabin with an air of strained authority. She offered pre-departure drinks to the man in 2A, a portly executive already hammering away on his laptop, and the couple in row 1, who were laughing loudly. She walked right past Alani, her eyes scanning the cabin as if 2B were an empty seat. Alani, accustomed to small slights, waited patiently. Perhaps Brenda was simply working her way from the front. But then a younger male flight attendant, Kyle, came by and also offered drinks to the passengers in row 3 behind her. Alani politely raised her hand as Kyle passed. "Excuse me." Kyle stopped, a deer-in-the-headlights look on his face. "Yes, ma'am. I'd just like a glass of water, please. No ice." "Of course," he said, and he seemed about to turn when Brenda's voice sliced through the cabin hum. "Kyle, a word." She beckoned him sharply toward the galley. Alani watched in the reflection of the window as Brenda spoke to him in a low, agitated tone, gesturing vaguely in her direction. Kyle nodded. His shoulders slumped. He returned a moment later, his face flushed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "We're pausing pre-departure service for a moment to assist with boarding." Alani frowned. That made no sense. Passengers were still trickling in, but the initial rush was over, and she had just watched him serve the row behind her seconds ago. "I see. You were just serving them," she said, nodding to the passengers in row 3. "Is there a problem?" No problem," Kyle said quickly, looking over his shoulder toward the galley where Brenda was now watching them, her arms crossed. "We'll resume service once we're in the air." Alani felt the familiar prickle of indignation, an old and weary companion. She had dealt with this her entire life, the subtle dismissive acts of bias that you could never quite prove. The assumed incompetence, the questioning looks in boardrooms, the surprise on people's faces when she introduced herself as Dr. Adebayo, the aerospace engineer with a PhD from MIT. But this felt different. It was so blatant, so needlessly petty. She decided to let it go. It wasn't worth the energy. She had a 200-page safety directive to review before her meeting tomorrow. She pulled her tablet from her briefcase and tried to focus. A few minutes later, Brenda returned to the man in 2A. "Mr. Davison, can I get you a refill on that scotch before we push back?" she asked, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. The question hung in the air, a direct contradiction to what Kyle had just told her. The man Davison grunted his approval, and Brenda bustled off to fetch his drink. She returned, refilled his glass, and once again ignored Alani completely. This was no longer a subtle slight. This was a deliberate, targeted act of disrespect. Alani was not a confrontational person by nature. Her work required precision calm and an adherence to facts and protocols, but it was that very adherence to protocol that now stirred her to action. The airline industry was built on rules big and small. A crew that willfully disregarded its own service standards for one passenger could be a crew that disregarded other more critical standards as well. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, a graceful, commanding presence in the cramped cabin. She walked the few steps to the forward galley. Brenda was there, wiping down the counter, her back to the cabin. "Excuse me," Alani said, her voice even and calm. "My name is Dr. Adebayo. I'm in seat 2B. I believe there has been a misunderstanding." Brenda turned slowly, her expression a mask of polite indifference. "Is there a problem?" "Yes, there is. I requested a glass of water and was told service was paused. You then proceeded to serve the gentleman next to me. I'd like to understand why." Brenda's smile was thin and sharp. "We are prioritizing the needs of our StratusJet Platinum members first. We'll get to everyone else once we reach cruising altitude." It was a masterful lie delivered with complete confidence. Alani knew for a fact that the man in 2A wasn't a Platinum member. She'd overheard him complaining at the gate that he was flying StratusJet for the first time because his usual airline had been booked solid. "That's an interesting policy," Alani replied, her voice remaining level. "Could you please show me where it's written in your customer service charter? Because I've read it, and it makes no mention of tiered pre-departure beverage service based on status. It simply says it's offered to all first-class passengers." Brenda's composure finally cracked. A flicker of anger flashed in her eyes. "Are you calling me a liar? I'm stating a fact and asking for clarification on your procedure." Alani countered, her gaze unwavering. "Your airline, like all airlines operating in U.S. airspace, is bound by a set of operational and service standards. You seem to be deviating from them. I just want to know why." The reference to standards and procedure seemed to infuriate Brenda even more. This passenger wasn't just complaining. She was speaking a language of regulation that Brenda wasn't prepared to counter. "You are creating a disturbance," Brenda snapped, her voice rising. "I need you to return to your seat, now." "I will return to my seat as soon as I receive the service I am entitled to, or a legitimate, policy-based reason why it's being denied." The standoff was on. The quiet hum of the cabin was now filled with a tense silence as other passengers began to notice the confrontation. Kyle hovered nervously at the edge of the galley, wringing his hands. Brenda, cornered and exposed, made a fatal decision. She chose to escalate. "That's it. I'm calling the captain." The captain of Flight 712 was a man named Robert Miller. He was in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed silver moustache and the easy, unearned authority of a man who had rarely been challenged in his life. He had spent 30 years flying, and in his mind, the cockpit door separated the professionals from the emotional cargo in the back. When Brenda's voice came over the intercom, tight with fury, he sighed. A disruptive passenger. The last thing he needed. He emerged from the cockpit, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorframe. He strode into the galley, projecting an aura of calm, decisive command. "What's the situation here, Brenda?" he asked, pointedly addressing his flight attendant, while barely glancing at Alani. "Captain Miller," Brenda said, her voice laced with vindication. "This passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions. She left her seat and is becoming aggressive. I'm concerned for the safety of the flight." The accusation was so outrageously false, it momentarily stunned Alani into silence. Aggressive, concerned for safety, she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a single threatening gesture. She had calmly inquired about a service failure. Alani found her voice. "Captain, that is a gross mischaracterization. I simply asked your flight attendant to explain why I was being denied a service that was offered to every other passenger around me." Captain Miller finally turned his full attention to her. He scanned her up and down, the simple but elegant pantsuit, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the dark skin of her face. His expression was one of paternalistic condescension. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and patronizing, as if speaking to a difficult child. "My crew is responsible for the safety and security of this aircraft. Their instructions are not suggestions. If they tell you to sit down, you sit down. We can discuss whatever beverage-related issues you have once we're on the ground in Washington. Now please, let's not delay the departure of 87 other people over a glass of water." The dismissal was total. He hadn't asked for her side of the story. He hadn't sought to de-escalate or understand. He had seen a blonde, uniformed crew member and a black woman, and he had made his choice instantly. He had accepted Brenda's distorted narrative without question. "Captain Miller," Alani said, her voice now turning icy with precision. "The issue is not the water. The issue is the arbitrary and discriminatory application of your airline's own service policies. Furthermore, your lead flight attendant has just made a false report about a passenger's behavior, which I suspect is a violation of FAA regulations regarding crew professionalism. This is no longer a customer service complaint. It is now a safety concern." The mention of the FAA regulation was like a red flag to a bull. To Miller, it was the empty threat of an entitled passenger who thought they could Google a few rules to get their way. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" he scoffed. "Are you going to report me to the FAA?" "I'm stating the facts of the situation," Alani replied calmly. "You have a crew member who has lied about a passenger's conduct and is applying rules inconsistently. As the captain, you are endorsing that behavior. I am asking you as the pilot in command to rectify the situation." She was giving him an out, a chance to step back, assess and make the right call. All he had to do was tell Brenda to serve the water and apologize for the confusion. The incident would end. But Captain Miller's ego was now fully engaged. He was not going to be lectured by a passenger. He was not going to have his authority questioned. "I'm not asking you again, ma'am. Return to your seat, or you will be removed from this aircraft." The finality in his tone was absolute. The man in 2A, Mr. Davison, who had been watching the whole exchange, now snorted. "For God's sake, just give the woman her water. What is the big deal?" Brenda shot him a venomous look. "Sir, please remain out of it." The couple in row 1, however, looked uncomfortable. The woman whispered to her husband, "This is wrong. She's being perfectly calm." But Captain Miller had made up his mind. Alani stood her ground for a moment longer, her mind racing, processing the cascading failures of protocol she was witnessing. The captain's immediate siding with his crew without investigation, the flight attendant's false accusation, the public nature of the confrontation. This was a crew that was dangerously unprofessional. "Very well," Alani said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You can remove me from the aircraft, But I want your name and the names of your flight crew." "You'll get them from our complaint department," Miller sneered. He nodded to Brenda. "Call airport security." As Alani walked back to her seat to retrieve her briefcase, a profound sense of calm settled over her. The weariness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. They thought they were winning. They thought they were ejecting a difficult woman who didn't know her place. They had no idea that they had just failed the most important spot check of their careers. And she was the examiner. 2 airport security officers, looking apologetic, boarded the plane. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Alani nodded and walked with them past the pitying and scornful looks of the other passengers off the jet bridge and back into the terminal. As she stepped into the bustling concourse, the door to Flight 712 hissed shut behind her. Brenda, Captain Miller, and Stratusjet thought the problem was solved. In reality, their problem was just beginning. Alani stood by the large window at gate C-27, watching as the ground crew prepared to push back Flight 712. The security officers had been polite, taking a brief perfunctory statement and confirming she wasn't a threat. Once they realized her disruption was a verbal disagreement, they had pointed her to the Stratusjet customer service desk and left her alone. She didn't go to the customer service desk. A complaint form felt laughably inadequate for what had just occurred. This was no longer about a missed glass of water. It was about a systemic breakdown in crew resource management professionalism and adherence to federal aviation regulations, the very fabric of the safety net she was sworn to uphold. Brenda's lie wasn't just rude, it was a fabrication of a security threat, a dangerous precedent. Captain Miller's blind allegiance to his crew over a calm, rule-citing passenger demonstrated a catastrophic failure in judgment. If he couldn't properly assess a simple customer service dispute, how could he be trusted to assess a complex, high-stakes in-flight emergency? What if a passenger pointed out a genuine safety concern? A strange noise from the engine, a whiff of smoke, and this same crew dismissed them with such prejudice the thought sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't personal anymore. It was professional. It was her duty. She pulled out her secure government-issued phone, a stark, functional device that looked nothing like a typical smartphone. She scrolled through her contacts, past senators and cabinet secretaries, to a name near the top, David Peterson, FAA Administrator, her boss. It was 4:15 p.m. Central Time. He would be preparing to leave his D.C. office. She hit dial. "Peterson," his voice barked, always sounding rushed. "David, it's Alani." "Alani, I thought you were in the air. Everything all right with the audit?" "The audit is fine. The flight back is not," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I'm at O'Hare. I've just been removed from Stratusjet Flight 712 to Dulles." There was a pause on the other end of the line. David Peterson knew Alani Adebayo well. She was unflappable, methodical, and utterly devoid of personal drama. For her to be removed from a flight was to him an event of seismic significance. "Removed on what grounds?" Alani proceeded to give him a concise, fact-based summary of the events, stripped of all emotion. She detailed the initial refusal of service, the fabricated platinum member policy, Brenda's escalating hostility, the false accusation of her being aggressive, and Captain Robert Miller's complete failure to investigate before threatening and removing her. She quoted the specific regulations she believed they had violated, referencing sections of the Federal Aviation Regulations Handbook from memory. The core issue, David, she concluded, is not the discrimination, though that was the catalyst. It's the demonstrated inability of the pilot in command and his senior crew to follow protocol, de-escalate a situation, or make a rational, unbiased judgment. The entire command structure in that cabin is compromised. I have zero confidence in that crew's ability to safely operate the aircraft." Peterson was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was grim. "Where is the flight now?" Alani glanced out the window. The jet bridge had just pulled away. "They're pushing back from the gate as we speak." "Stay where you are," Peterson commanded. "I'll handle the immediate situation. Then I want you to go to the O'Hare FAA field office. I'll have a team meet you there. We're opening an immediate safety probe into Stratus Jet, starting with this crew." "I've already got their names," Alani said. "Captain Robert Miller, Senior Flight Attendant Brenda Jenkins." "Good," Peterson said. "They're about to have a very bad day." Alani disconnected the call. She watched as Flight 712, now free of its troublesome passenger, began its slow taxi towards the runway. From their perspective, they had won. They had asserted their authority and were now on their way. Inside the cockpit, Captain Miller was probably feeling smug. Brenda was likely in the galley complaining to Kyle about passengers like that. They were all secure in their little metal tube, flying at 35,000 feet, blissfully unaware of the storm they had flown directly into. Alani's phone buzzed. It was a text from Peterson. "ATC has been contacted. 712 is returning to gate, citing unforeseen crew inspection. Await FAA officials." A slow smile touched Alani's lips for the first time that day. She watched the plane at the far end of the taxiway slow stop, and then begin a slow, lumbering turn. It was coming back. The executive in 2A was about to be very late for his meeting. The passengers on Flight 712 let out a collective groan when Captain Miller's voice crackled over the intercom 10 minutes after they had pushed back from the gate. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. It appears we have an unforeseen administrative issue. Air traffic control has instructed us to return to the gate. We don't have any more information at this time, but we'll update you as soon as we know something. We apologize for the delay." The cabin buzzed with confused speculation. A mechanical issue, a security threat. Mr. Davison in 2A was livid, complaining loudly about the delay. Brenda and Kyle moved through the cabin, offering placating smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Brenda felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was not normal. She'd never had a flight ordered back to the gate by ATC for an administrative issue. When the jet bridge reconnected with a solid thud, the cabin door was opened, not by a gate agent, but by two stern-faced individuals in dark suits who flashed badges at Brenda. "We're from the Federal Aviation Administration," the lead agent, a man named Henderson, said. "We're here to speak with Captain Robert Miller and Flight Attendant Brenda Jenkins. The rest of the crew and passengers will need to deplane and await further instructions." Brenda's face went white. She looked from the agents to the cockpit door, then back again, her mind refusing to connect the dots. The woman from 2B. It had to be. But how Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit, his face a mask of confusion and irritation. "What in the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Your flight has been grounded, pending an immediate crew safety and compliance review," Agent Henderson stated flatly. "You and Ms. Jenkins will come with us. Your operating certificates are hereby suspended, pending the outcome of this investigation." The words hit Miller like a physical blow. Certificates suspended. This was a career-ending event. This wasn't a customer complaint. This was an official FAA action. The full weight of the federal government had just crashed down on his head. "This is insane," he sputtered. "Over what, a passenger complaint? The grounds will be made clear during your formal interview." Henderson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Now please, come with us." As a stunned Captain Miller and a visibly trembling Brenda were escorted off the plane, past the bewildered faces of their passengers, the second agent addressed the remaining crew, including a pale and sweating Kyle. This aircraft is not to be moved. The entire Stratusjet fleet is now under an emergency operations stand-down order, effective immediately pending a preliminary review of company-wide crew training and conduct protocols. All flights nationwide are to be grounded. The news rippled through the aviation world with the speed of a shockwave. At airports from Los Angeles to New York, Stratusjet planes preparing for takeoff were ordered back to their gates. Flights in the air were instructed to continue to their destinations, but were forbidden from taking on new passengers for a return journey. The entire operational fleet of a national airline, 128 aircraft, had been grounded by a single decisive order. In the Chicago O'Hare FAA field office, Alani Adebayo sat at a conference table with the regional director and a team of investigators. The initial reports were already coming in. The interviews with the other passengers of Flight 712 painted a damning picture. Mr. Davison, the executive from 2A, confirmed Alani's version of events, stating that her conduct was nothing but professional and that the flight attendant was on a power trip. The couple from Row 1 gave a similar account, but Alani knew this went deeper. The arrogance displayed by that crew wasn't born in a vacuum. It was fostered. It was a symptom of a diseased corporate culture. "I want a full audit of Stratusjet's training programs," Alani instructed the team. "Specifically, I want to see their modules on de-escalation, crew resource management, and implicit bias. I want to pull the complaint files for every pilot and flight attendant in their system. I want to see how many have been filed, how many have been investigated, and what if any disciplinary action was taken." She paused, looking at the faces around the table. A crew doesn't behave like that unless they feel they are untouchable. Our job is to find out who gave them that impression. Meanwhile, at Stratusjet corporate headquarters in Dallas, CEO Wallace Finch was in a state of apoplectic rage. He was screaming at his COO over the phone. Grounded. The whole fleet for what? Some incident on a flight out of Chicago. One passenger complaint does not ground an airline. Get our lawyers on the phone with the FAA. I want to know who made this call. I want their name. His assistant burst into the office, his face ashen. "Sir, we just got the official notice from the FAA. It details the preliminary cause for the order." "And," Finch roared, "the order was initiated following an incident involving a senior FAA official who was a passenger on Flight 712. The official is Dr. Alani Adebayo." Wallace Finch froze the phone, slipping from his grasp. He knew that name. Everyone in the industry knew that name. Dr. Alani Adebayo, the Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety. She was brilliant, legendarily thorough, and utterly incorruptible. She was the one person in the entire federal government you didn't want to cross. His airline hadn't just mistreated a passenger. They had picked a fight with their regulator, their judge and their executioner all rolled into one. He sank into his chair, the full, terrifying scope of the disaster finally dawning on him. His company wasn't just in trouble. It was on the verge of extinction. The FAA investigation into Stratusjet was not a polite inquiry. It was an autopsy. Under the authority of the emergency order teams of federal investigators, descended upon the airline's Dallas headquarters and its maintenance hubs across the country. Dr. Alani Adebayo coordinated the effort from Washington, working with a relentless surgical precision. She knew that the incident on Flight 712 was the tip of an iceberg, and she was determined to uncover what lay beneath the surface. It didn't take long to find the rot. The first major discovery came from the Human Resources Department. Investigators demanded the complete personnel file for Brenda Jenkins. What they found was a shocking pattern of behavior. Over her 12-year career with Stratusjet, Brenda had accumulated 19 formal passenger complaints. 8 of those complaints explicitly mentioned discriminatory language or behavior targeting minority passengers. 2 involved baseless accusations of passengers being aggressive or a security risk. In every single case, StratosJet's HR department had concluded the investigation with the finding, employee acted in accordance with company policy. Brenda had never received so much as a written warning. Her file contained glowing performance reviews, praising her for her firmness and command of the cabin. She was, it turned out, exactly the kind of employee StratosJet's management valued. The file for Captain Robert Miller was less overt, but equally troubling. He had a reputation among co-pilots for being arrogant and dismissive of their input, a classic sign of poor crew resource management, CRM, a cornerstone of modern aviation safety. 3 separate first officers had requested transfers away from flying with him, citing a hostile cockpit environment. The airline had granted the transfers without ever investigating Miller's conduct. He was a senior captain with a clean flight record, and the company had no interest in rocking the boat. The training records proved to be a gold mine of negligence. The investigators found that StratosJet's mandatory annual de-escalation and bias training was a sham. It consisted of a 15-minute online video that most employees clicked through while doing other tasks. The completion records were falsified. Digital signatures were batch uploaded by a single IT administrator to ensure a 100% compliance rate for FAA audits. The airline was saving a few $1,000s on proper training while fostering a culture of ignorance and confrontation. But the most damning discoveries came from the maintenance logs, Alani's own area of expertise. Spurred by the obvious decay in the airline's human systems, she directed the investigators to conduct spot checks of recently serviced aircraft. The findings were horrifying. In a maintenance hub in Denver, they found a mechanic, a young man named Ben Carter, who had been flagging issues for months. He came forward as a whistleblower, providing investigators with a secret cache of documents. He proved that StratosJet, in a desperate bid to cut costs and keep planes in the air, was using unapproved third-party replacement parts for non-critical components, a direct violation of FAA regulations. Even more shocking, he revealed a systemic practice of pencil-whipping maintenance sign-offs, certifying that complex engine checks had been completed, when in reality they had been skipped to meet tight turnaround schedules. They called it efficiency, Ben told the investigators, his voice trembling. The shift supervisors got bonuses based on how quickly we could get a plane back to the gate. If you took the full regulation time to do a proper check, you were punished. Your hours were cut. You were put on the worst shifts. So people cut corners. Everyone knew it was wrong, but you either played the game or you lost your job. The picture was now terrifyingly clear. The culture of arrogance and corner-cutting that Alani had experienced in the first-class cabin was a direct reflection of the entire corporate ethos of StratosJet. From the CEO's office down to the maintenance bay, the airline had prioritized profits and expediency over safety, professionalism, and basic human decency. The refusal to serve a glass of water stemmed from the same root of corruption that led to falsifying engine reports. Back in Washington, Alani presented the preliminary findings to Administrator Peterson. The room was silent as she laid out the litany of failures the racist flight attendant protected by HR, the arrogant captain with a history of ignoring his co-pilots, the fake training modules, the unapproved parts, the fraudulent maintenance logs. They created a culture of impunity. Alani stated, her voice cold as steel. They taught their employees that the rules didn't apply to them, whether it was a rule about customer respect or a rule about engine tolerances. The incident on Flight 712 wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable and predictable result of their entire business model. Peterson looked at the mountain of evidence. "They're not just unsafe," he said grimly. "They're a clear and present danger to the flying public." The decision was made. The initial grounding, the emergency operations stand down, was no longer temporary. The FAA would be moving for a full indefinite suspension of Stratosjet's air operator certificate. It was a corporate death sentence. Alani felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction. She had followed the thread of a single act of bigotry, and it had unraveled an entire tapestry of corruption, potentially saving hundreds of lives in the process. She had set out to get a glass of water, and had ended up averting a potential catastrophe. The public fallout for Stratosjet was not a storm. It was a Category 5 hurricane. The FAA's press release, a meticulously worded document detailing a catastrophic culture of non-compliant safety violations and training fraud, was the first blast of wind. But it was the media that provided the deluge. The story was irresistible, the David and Goliath tale of a black woman, armed only with her quiet authority, bringing a corporate giant to its knees. Cable news channels ran segments debating the incident 24/7. The Wall Street Journal published a multi-page exposé on the financial rot within Stratosjet, while viral social media threads turned screenshots of Brenda Jenkins's sneer into a meme representing corporate arrogance. For the individuals at the epicenter of this hurricane karma was not an abstract concept. It was a series of specific, devastating, and deeply personal events that dismantled their lives piece by piece. Brenda Jenkins was in her own mind the primary victim. Her termination was swift and unceremonious, a cold email from an HR department that was now in full panic mode. Her real day of reckoning came 2 months later in a sterile beige conference room for her FAA certification hearing. She arrived defiant, dressed in a power suit, as if attending a business meeting. She told the 3-person panel that she had been the victim of a professional complainer, and that her actions were necessary to maintain order in the cabin. "I have 12 years of exemplary service," she stated, her voice tight with indignation. "I will not be sacrificed because of one overly sensitive passenger who didn't get her water fast enough." The lead panelist, a stoic woman with iron-grey hair, looked down at the thick file in front of her. "Ms. Jenkins," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "this isn't about one incident. This is about a pattern. We have 19 formal complaints in your file, 8 of which allege discriminatory behavior. You have twice before made false accusations about a passenger's aggressiveness. You lied about a non-existent airline policy. You then lied to your captain about a passenger's conduct, fabricating a security concern. Your actions demonstrate a profound and dangerous inability to perform your duties professionally." Brenda's defiant facade crumbled. "He should have backed me up. The captain is supposed to back his crew. The captain is supposed to ensure the safety of the flight," the panelist corrected her. "A duty he also failed. The decision of this panel is unanimous. Your flight attendant, certificate of demonstrated proficiency, is hereby permanently revoked. You will not work in the cabin of any US-regulated air carrier again. We're done here." Blacklisted and stripped of her career, Brenda's world collapsed. The flight attendants' union, after reviewing the overwhelming evidence, refused to take her case. Her savings dwindled. She lost her condo. 6 months later, a journalist found her working a double shift at a Greasy Spoon diner off the interstate. Her uniform was stained, her hair was a mess, and the practiced, condescending smile she once wielded as a weapon was gone, replaced by a permanent, weary bitterness. She saw the journalist's notepad sneered and said, "Get out. Some of us have to work for a living." Captain Robert Miller believed his seniority and spotless flight record would save him. He was catastrophically wrong. At his own license revocation hearing, he projected an aura of aggrieved authority, treating the FAA panel like a slightly dim-witted group of junior officers. He referred to Dr. Adebayo as the lady passenger and described the entire event as a minor customer service issue that was blown completely out of proportion. I made a command decision based on the information provided by my senior crew member. He argued, his voice resonating with self-importance. That is my prerogative and my responsibility as pilot in command. The head of the panel, a former Air Force pilot, leaned forward. Your responsibility, Captain Miller, is to exercise sound judgment. You failed. You failed to assess a situation. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to question a report that was by all other accounts patently false. You accepted the word of a compromised flight attendant over the calm, factual statements of a passenger. Your judgment is the single most critical asset you possess, and you proved it to be fatally flawed. You are a liability in the cockpit. The verdict was clinical and brutal. His airline transport pilot license was revoked. His career, the very core of his identity for 35 years, was over. The man who once commanded a 100-ton machine filled with souls was stripped of his authority. The effect was profound. He sold his large house to cover legal fees. He and his wife divorced. He was last seen by a former co-pilot giving a driving lesson in a beat-up sedan, his face grim as he instructed a teenager on the finer points of a three-point turn. The gold stripes on his old uniform, which he reportedly kept hanging in his closet, were now just tarnished decorations on a costume he could never wear again. CEO Wallace Finch was undone not by regulators, but by the cold calculus of capitalism. He barricaded himself in the Stratusjet corporate headquarters, which the media had dubbed the bunker. In a final desperate emergency board meeting, he presented a plan to rebrand the airline, fire the entire Chicago-based crew roster, and launch a massive apology campaign. He was met with icy stares. The lead director, a private equity titan named Jonathan Pierce, slid a tablet across the mahogany table. On the screen was the Stratusjet stock price, a vertical cliff ending in a flat line of near zero value. "It's over, Wally," Pierce said, his voice flat. "Our legal team says we're facing Chapter 7 liquidation. The brand is toxic. The assets are tainted. The only thing left to do is manage the fallout. The board has accepted your resignation, effective immediately." "You can't do this," Finch roared. "I built this company, and you flew it straight into the ground," Pierce countered. "You fostered a culture where a flight attendant thought she was untouchable, and a maintenance chief thought it was okay to sign off on phantom engine checks. This isn't on them. This is on you. Goodbye, Wally." Stratusjet itself died a slow, agonizing death in bankruptcy court. Its planes were repossessed and sold off at auction to cargo carriers and third-world airlines. Its branding was stripped from gates at airports across the country. The chaos for its 12,000 employees was immense. They showed up to work one day to find the doors chained and a notice of liquidation taped to the glass. In the end, only Kyle, the timid junior flight attendant, found a path to redemption. He gave a full and honest accounting of the events to the FAA, expressing his fear and regret. His honesty earned him a reprimand instead of a revocation. After a year of working odd jobs, he was hired by a major airline, forever humbled by the memory of how close he came to losing everything because he was afraid to stand up to one person's hatred. The cascade of karma had washed away the guilty, and in the process, cleansed the one who was merely weak, giving him a second chance to be strong. 18 months later. The air in the vast hangar at the FAA's Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center in Oklahoma City was thick with the scent of hydraulic fluid metal and coffee. It was a cathedral of aviation, home to dissected jet engines mounted on stands like modern sculptures, cross-sections of fuselages revealing their intricate skeletons and the silent hulking forms of aircraft used for training. Before a newly installed podium, a class of over 100 new aviation safety inspectors, the largest and most diverse in the agency's history, sat waiting. Dr. Alani Adebayo stood to the side, looking not at the eager faces before her, but at a new addition to the hangar's historical display. Tucked between the faded logos of Braniff International and Pan Am was the sleek, modern emblem of Stratosjet. Below it, a simple plaque read, "Ceased Operations 2024, a case study in systemic safety culture failure." She felt no triumphalism looking at it, no thrill of victory. She felt only the profound weight of consequence. The collapse of Stratosjet had been a necessary amputation to save the body of the flying public, but it had come at a cost. Thousands of people, pilots, mechanics, gate agents, administrative staff had lost their jobs. Many were good people, trapped in a rotten system, and their hardship was a somber footnote to the story of karmic justice. It was a reminder that even the most righteous actions have complex, often painful ripple effects. The regional director finished his introduction, and Alani walked to the podium. A respectful silence fell over the hangar. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old men and women of every conceivable background. She saw a young black woman in the front row, her posture radiating a fierce intelligence, and felt a pang of recognition. She hoped with every fiber of her being that the path for this young woman would be even a little bit clearer than her own had been. "Good morning," she began, her voice, calm and clear, needing no microphone in the focused quiet. "They've asked me to speak to you about the future of aviation safety. But to do that, I need to talk about the past. Look around this hangar. You see the machinery of flight. We inspect every rivet, every wire, every hydraulic line on these machines with a relentless passion for detail. We do this because we know that a single hairline fracture, a single faulty sensor, a single point of failure can lead to catastrophe." She let the words hang in the air before continuing. "For too long we have neglected to inspect the human systems with that same rigor. The culture in the boardroom, the biases in the cockpit, the professionalism in the cabin. These are not soft skills. They are not secondary concerns to be handled by human resources. They are critical safety components, as vital as a turbine blade or a landing gear strut." She had spent the last year turning that belief into unbreachable federal policy. The Professionalism and Inclusivity in Aviation Safety Program, or PIAS, was her legacy. It had been a brutal fight. Airline lobbyists had screamed about compliance costs. CEOs had privately scoffed at what they called woke regulations. Alani had met their resistance not with rhetoric, but with a mountain of irrefutable data. She had commissioned a study that drew direct statistical lines between airlines with high numbers of crew conduct complaints and those with higher rates of minor safety incidents and near misses. She proved in the cold, hard language of numbers that executives understood that a culture of disrespect was a leading indicator of a culture of danger. Under the PIAS framework, she explained to the recruits, your job has expanded. You will still audit maintenance logs, but you will also audit the effectiveness of an airline's de-escalation training. And I don't mean checking a box that says they watched a 15-minute video. I mean, you will observe the training. You will see if it's a realistic, scenario-based program or a corporate sham. You will pull personnel files. You will look for patterns. Does a pilot have a history of ignoring first officer input? does a flight attendant have a string of complaints that have been dismissed without cause because a captain who won't listen to his co-pilot about a brewing storm is the same captain who won't listen to a passenger about a strange noise from the wing. Somewhere in Seattle, a young man named Kyle was living proof of her words. He was in a flight simulator, not as a pilot, but as part of an advanced flight attendant training for a legacy carrier. The scenario was a difficult one. A belligerent, intoxicated passenger was refusing to follow instructions. But the airline's new Pierce-compliant training wasn't just about subduing the passenger. It was about teamwork. The simulation forced Kyle and his colleagues to communicate clearly with the cockpit, to de-escalate without aggression, and to work as a seamless team. He felt a confidence and competence he'd never known at Stratosjet, where the only rule had been to assert dominance. He was grateful every single day for the lesson he had been forced to learn. Alani's voice dropped slightly, becoming more personal. 18 months ago, a senior government official was on a flight. She was treated unprofessionally. It started with a small act of disrespect, something that she and many people who look like her have experienced countless times. But this time it was different, because that act of disrespect was a thread, and when that thread was pulled, an entire tapestry of corruption, negligence, and systemic failure unraveled. She paused, making eye contact with the young woman in the front row. That crew felt untouchable. That captain felt his authority was absolute. The company that employed them believed that cutting corners on training and maintenance was a clever business strategy. They were all wrong. They mistook a passenger for a problem when in fact she was an examiner, and they were undergoing their final fatal test. The most dangerous aircraft is not the one with a faulty engine. It's the one where the people in charge believe the rules don't apply to them. Your job as inspectors for the Federal Aviation Administration is to be the rule. You are the embodiment of the standard. Your job is to ensure that everyone from the CEO in his skyscraper office to the mechanic on the freezing tarmac at midnight understands that safety is a culture, not a slogan. And that culture begins always with respect. It begins with treating every single soul who steps onto an aircraft, not as cargo, but as a human being whose life is in your hands. She stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the hangar erupted in thunderous, sustained applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar of affirmation, of shared purpose. Alani gave a small, dignified nod. As she walked away from the stage, she was already thinking about her next challenge, the next system to improve, the next fracture in the foundation of safety to reinforce. The ghost of Stratosjet was no longer a weight. It was a foundation, a dark, solid bedrock upon which a safer, more just and more vigilant aviation industry would be built. What began with a quiet request for a glass of water ended with an entire airline being erased from existence. Dr. Alani Adebayo's story is a powerful, real-world reminder that integrity and professionalism are not optional extras. They are the very bedrock of safety. It shows how one person armed with quiet dignity and unwavering expertise can hold an entire corporation accountable. The arrogance of the flight crew and their captain was not just a customer service failure. It was a symptom of a deep systemic rot that put lives at risk. They mistook a woman of color for a nobody, and in doing so sealed their own fate and the fate of their company. This story is a testament to the fact that true power isn't about raising your voice, but about knowing exactly which levers to pull. If this story of karmic justice and systemic change resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories where the truth is stranger and often more satisfying than fiction. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone catastrophically underestimated the person they were dealing with? Let's discuss. Thanks for listening.